If you're looking to get a new camera and you're interested in Sony, there are so many choices that are so neat, but there are also a lot of them. So what I thought would be helpful is to break down Sony's camera lineup in a way that hopefully helps you either find the camera that's right for you or at least point you in the right direction for a camera that's going to work for you. And before we do that, this video is not sponsored, which hopefully you can tell by my Canon shirt, and also I'm filming this on a Canon camera because that's the one that happens to be at my desk. So Canon cameras are great. Nikon is great. Lumix is great. Fuji's great. All cameras are great. But I do have my Sony mirrorless cameras over here that we're going to talk about. And I've been using primarily Sony cameras for the past 5 years. So that's the system I'm most familiar with. And it's also one that can be a little bit complicated because Sony loves to introduce new camera models, change prices, introduce new models with like combination of features of older models. So there's sort of like hybrid versions of cameras floating around. And the other disclaimer to make is that even though I have Sony's website up with their objective tech specs and prices and stuff, this is all pretty much based on my opinion, my personal experience. So that, you know, your specific needs might be a little bit different than my opinion. So don't let me override your needs. And the other thing is that I'm really looking at this more from a video-centric perspective, even though basically all of these cameras could be anywhere from good to excellent photo cameras. I'm kind of looking more from the video creator perspective. I have the lineup here organized by price, lowest to highest. So the lowest price you can see is the ZV-E10 for $749 currently. And then the highest price is the Cinema FR7, a robotic PTZ camera for $12,000. So that's quite a spectrum. $750 to $12,000. Where might you land within that spectrum is probably a good thing to ask yourself. Also important to note, just a weird quirk of Sony's website, if something says no longer available, it just means out of stock. It does not mean discontinued. It sounds like discontinued. It's not. So the best place to start here, once you've decided that you're interested in getting a Sony camera, the other thing to look at, probably the biggest delineating factor, is going to be sensor size. And so if I come over here on the side and click on this, we can see that we have APS-C or full frame. That's really going to be the biggest deciding factor within the Sony camera system or most other camera systems as well. And if you're unfamiliar with full frame versus crop, it just has to do with the size of the sensor in the camera. Speaking very generally, full frame sensors tend to give a bit better image quality because they're a little bit better in low light. They have less issues with rolling shutter. It's a little bit easier to get shallower depth of field, especially at wider angles. Getting a wide shot with, a blurry background and a shallow depth of field is a surprisingly tricky thing to do. And what I'm talking about, this is my Sony FX3, which is a full frame camera. But if I take the lens off and you see the sensor in here, the part that's shiny, that's the sensor, and this is a full frame sensor, so that's as big of a sensor as you're going to get on a Sony camera. And the reason it's called full frame, if I grab my Canon AE1 35mm camera, this is actually my grandpa's camera from when I was a kid. This is a 35mm film camera. It has a mirror in there, but basically the internals, the mirror, and the window to go through to the piece of film to expose the image is the exact same size as a full frame sensor. So a full frame digital camera sensor is the equivalent of a 35mm film camera. So it's a 1-to-1 comparison, which is, in the transition from film to digital, that was a very important thing. It's like how when you record something, you refer to it as footage because film used to be a physical thing measured in feet, and now it's all memory cards, but you still call it footage. Crop sensor, on the other hand, is just a smaller sensor. So this is the Canon M50. This is a crop sensor camera. If I grab my FX3 again, and then you look at the M50, trying to get it to shine in there, shine bright like a diamond. There we go. You can see the difference in sensor size. And if I just hold these up, that's also kind of an easier way to see. So crop sensor cameras, again, speaking very generally, they tend to crop in, which means you get a little bit more reach. Basically, this is a 20mm lens. It's on my Sony FX3 right now. The Sony crop sensor cameras have a crop factor of 1.5. So if you take 20 times 1.5, that means this lens on a crop sensor camera would really look more like a 30mm lens-ish around that point. And so that's kind of a thing that your frame of reference for what lens focal lengths changes on a crop sensor camera, whereas on a full frame camera, 30mm lens is a 30mm lens, 50 is 50, etc., etc. Crop sensor cameras can definitely get shallow depth of field and blurry backgrounds, but it's a little bit tougher, especially at wider angles, just because the camera itself is naturally cropped in. So sometimes you gotta like go really, really wide, and getting a wide lens, it's also a fast lens with a big aperture, is sometimes a tricky thing to do. The Sigma 16mm f1.4 is my favorite crop sensor prime lens for trying to get as close to like a full frame look like you're looking at right now. Otherwise, a big advantage to crop sensor cameras is that they do tend to be more affordable. If we go to Sony's lineup and we go to the lower price cameras, these are mostly all crop sensor. And if we go all the way down to the more expensive cameras, they're all full frame cameras. So you can kind of see that delineation. There's a little bit of overlap in the middle. And Sony, I will say, does a good job of introducing a few crop sensor cameras that have, like the FX30 here, has the exact same features as its full frame counterpart. It's just the sensor size. Because even though it's easy to generalize that a full frame camera is better than a crop sensor camera, it's not necessarily the case. A lot of people will choose crop sensor cameras for things like wildlife and sports where you want a lot of reach, and especially because lenses are super expensive, if you can add 1.5 times reach to your lens by just getting a new camera instead of another very, very expensive long lens. But that's sort of the basics of crop sensor versus full frame. And so that's one of the first decisions you'll have to make, which could either be determined by your needs. Do you want as much reach as possible? Then crop sensor's the way to go. Or your budget. Do you want, the best camera you can get for the lowest price? Probably going to be a crop sensor camera. So if you're looking then, which camera should you get? The ZV-E10, I have a video on this that actually compares the original ZV-E10, which is this camera right here, $749 currently. It's about $100 more to get it with a kit lens, which is a pretty decent lens. There's also the ZV-E10 Mark II, which you can see $1,200, so more expensive, but some pretty significant upgrades. These cameras here are my favorite intro cameras to recommend, especially just the original ZV-E10. Even though it's several years old at this point, it's still quite a phenomenal camera. I mean, my main camera is the Sony FX3, which is almost 6 years old. My second main camera is the A7S III, which is 6 years old. And then I do have the A7 V, which is very new. The ZV-E10 is a great camera because it kind of gives you a little bit of everything. You can do photos with it, you can do videos with it. A lot of people use this for YouTube, for talking head videos like I'm doing right now, basically as, a nice webcam. It is a crop sensor camera. You can get it in black or white, which is just kind of cool. You don't always have that option with cameras. And like I said, you can also then get a 16 to 50mm kit lens with it for about $100 more if you want. The kit lens is a great way to learn. If you don't have a camera, you don't know where to begin, you grab that and you start to learn what you like, what you don't like, and that can help inform what lens you want next. It has a flip out screen. It has really good autofocus. It's just a super solid camera. Now the ZV-E10 Mark II, which is the upgraded version, basically just has better autofocus, has some kind of better video specific features. It also uses a different battery that gets you more battery life. It has less overheating issues. The ZV-E10 is pretty easy to overcome overheating issues, especially if you want to use it for like live streaming and stuff where it's going to be on for a long time. But the ZV-E10 Mark II, you have to worry about that quite a bit less. And it can also be bought with a kit lens for about $100 more as well. So if you don't know where to begin, those are kind of the two that I would really recommend looking at, especially if you also just want a camera. You want something that you want to take maybe out of your office, out of your studio. You want to film stuff on the go. You want to maybe get into some photography in addition to videography. That's kind of where the ZV-E10 will go. Now, if we're looking at the ZV-E10 and the ZV-E10 Mark II, there are these other cameras kind of floating around here, the 6400, 6100, and 6700, the 6000 series cameras. And these are sort of like beefed up versions of the ZV series, I guess you could say. The 64 and the 6100 are a little bit older than the ZV-E10 Mark II. They'll have flip out screens, really good autofocus. They're just super solid cameras that are they're physically a little bit bigger, even though they're pretty compact. They're a little bit more durable. And they have, especially when you get to the photo side, they have a little bit more like frame rate and photo capabilities. The Sony a6700 is their most capable, compact crop sensor camera. So if you want a crop sensor camera and you want Sony's most capable hybrid photo video camera that has kind of the traditional form factor, the 6700 is the way to go. I don't have a 6700, but I have a number of friends who have them, and everybody loves this camera. Like, I don't know anyone who has gotten the 6700 and not liked it. Now, you might notice right next to the a6700 for a couple $100 more is a full frame camera, the A7 III. This is the camera that really kind of helped Sony take over the video space, especially like the YouTube world. This was a camera back in like 2018, 2019, around then. If someone was using a Sony camera, they were probably using the Sony a7 III. Absolutely fantastic camera, incredible image quality, but it is an older camera. Still very excellent, but you do not have Sony's newer autofocus. You do not have Sony's newer menu system. You don't have the overheating reliability you have on their new cameras, or the lack of overheating reliability. And you also don't have a flip out screen. It kind of has like a tilt screen on the back. Flip out screens are good for a lot more than just filming yourself, although they are very helpful for that. Just getting a good point of view when you're doing photos or videos, having a screen that can be a variable angle really helps. The a7 III can basically only do this. It kind of just like tilts out a little bit and kind of up a little bit. So if you're behind the camera, you can sort of get some okay angles, but that's it. If you're in front of the camera or at an extreme angle, you're not really going to be able to see anything with the a7 III. So it is still an excellent camera, but I would kind of not really recommend it in 2026 unless you're absolutely like sold on, I have to buy a full frame camera today. It has to be brand new from Sony, and my budget is specifically $1,700. What do I get? Then this is your only option. But otherwise, it's a little bit dated, and especially because it is older, you could probably find a used one at a way better price that's still in pretty decent condition. Jumping now from the a7 III, we're moving mostly into full frame territory. We have the a7 IV, which I had for a number of years. This is a fantastic hybrid camera. So if you want to do a lot of video, you want to do a lot of photo, the a7 IV is awesome. It's not the best video camera in Sony's lineup. The things that it are really lacking are Sony's newer autofocus, but honestly, any of Sony's autofocus from like 2020 on is phenomenal, and it only gets better from there. It does have a flip out screen. It does not have 4K 120, which is a cool slow motion frame rate. It does have 4K 60, but it puts that into a pretty decent crop. It's a great photo camera, and it can do, I believe it can do 10 frames per second, which is awesome. I used mine for all kinds of stuff, sports, animals, things like that. But it is not as fast as like a pro camera, especially like a pro sports camera would be when it comes to taking photos. It's not quite that fast. It's a really good photo camera. It's not their best photo camera. It's a really good video camera. It's not their best video camera, but it's a really solid all-around camera. And the sensor, it is a full frame camera. It actually has a 7K sensor that downsamples to 4K, so you get really, really clean, good-looking 4K. The camera next to it, the FX30, this is interesting because it's a crop sensor camera. You can tell by the fact that the sensor looks so small, but it's wedged in between two full frame cameras. And that's because it is basically the Sony FX3, my main camera, just with a crop sensor. So if you really like the FX3, but you don't have the budget for this, or you don't need or want a full frame sensor, then that is where the FX30 comes into play. For $2,100, you get a very awesome, this is like such a good form factor, having used the FX3 for as many years as I have and as many videos as I have. It's fantastic. You do have a flip out screen. You do not have a viewfinder. The other important thing to note with this camera though, is you see this price is for the body only. If you get the body and the XLR handle, which is what I have that came with the FX3. I don't think you can buy the FX3, or at least you couldn't when I bought it. You couldn't buy it without the audio handle. Then it bumps up the price to $2,500. But what this does is it not only gives you a handle, which is nice, it gives you dual XLR inputs and then full audio controls, and also an additional 3.5 millimeter input. And it just goes into the camera's hot shoe, so there's no cables or anything. And it works really, really well. I got this camera at the end of 2020. And from that time to now, anytime that you see me not using a microphone in the frame, it's a microphone that I have boomed out of frame connected to this. So I've run hundreds and hundreds of hours of audio through here. It's been great. And I have even connected like broadcast microphones to this for remote podcasts and stuff. And it has phantom power, so you can run a cloud lifter if you need to do something for like an SM7B. You can actually do that from the audio handle here, which is really cool. So that bumps up the price to $2,500, but I definitely think if you're going to get one of Sony's FX series cameras and you have the option for the audio handle, it is very, very much worth it, basically if you record any kind of audio with your video. So the FX30 is a little bit of an anomaly because it's a crop sensor camera that's in with all the other full frame cameras there. And then we jump to the A7C Mark II. and the ZV-E1, which are more of Sony's compact full-frame cameras. The A7C Mark II is, I don't know if it's totally fair to call it this, but I mentioned the A6700. It's kind of like the full-frame version of that. It's a compact full-frame camera. It's several years old at this point, but it is an incredibly strong camera. A lot of people use it not just for their main camera, but especially for like secondary cameras or even third cameras for multicam setups, podcasts, interviews, corporate things. It's a very good, secondary camera. It does have some issues with potential overheating, and it doesn't have all of Sony's newest stuff, but it's still a really strong camera, and $2,100 for a full frame camera is great. Now, if you can bump up your budget a little bit more, that can get you the ZV-E1. This is actually my wife's main camera that she's been using in her office for the past couple of years. And this is the same sensor that's in the FX3, which is also the same sensor in the A7S III, much more expensive cameras. Same sensor, same image quality, just smashed into a more compact camera body. And that does a couple of things. It lowers the price a lot. So the camera's way cheaper than those other cameras, but it also keeps it very compact, but you still have that same image quality. I would say that this leans much more, its strength is much more video than photos, but you can use it for photos. And there is no viewfinder on this, so it's a compact camera that does not have a viewfinder. It's been very popular for YouTube, for vlogging, for, on-the-go video. Really, the only potential downside to the ZV-E1 is it does have a potential to overheat if you leave it on for a long time, like really more than an hour for like a live stream or a long recording session. You can really help circumvent overheating on pretty much any of the cameras that might have overheating issues with things like this. This is Ulanzi makes a fan, of which I am a fan, and this basically just clips in the back of the camera, and it can be run via a battery or USB, and then it cools the back of the camera, so it helps reduce the issues with overheating, but also sometimes just opening the camera's screen and leaving that flipped out lets airflow happen. On my wife's ZV-E10, something very interesting happened, which is her camera does not have issues with overheating as long as she's using an old Sigma lens with it. So it's actually the same type of setup that I currently have on my FX3. This is a Sigma lens meant for Canon cameras, and then a Sigma adapter that adapts it to the Sony camera. She has been using a 24mm version of this lens on her E1 for years and never had any overheating. She tried my Sony 24mm and started having overheating right away. And we learned that the reason that happens is because on the adapter, this adds space. This adds a lot of space in between the sensor and the camera and the lens. And that basically lets the camera cool. The Sony lenses there's no space. They're right there. And that traps heat more, and so the camera started overheating more. So it's just kind of a cool little trick maybe if you get an old Sigma lens for the Canon EF system and you use the Sigma MC11 adapter to adapt it to a Sony camera. It gives you extra airflow and air room, and you don't have to deal with overheating. The Sigma lenses work great with the Sigma adapter, but they do have loud autofocus. I don't know if I can turn this on, and I don't know if you can hear that clicking. But they are older lenses with louder autofocus, so if you're using a mic that's on your camera, it's definitely going to pick up that sound. If you're using an external mic or a mic off the camera, it's not an issue. All that to say, the ZV-E1 is a fantastic camera, especially if you want most of the image quality and those type of capabilities of the higher end cameras at a more affordable price and in a more compact form factor. The things that you're losing are some reliability in terms of overheating, and some durability because it's a much more plasticky camera versus the more robust and rugged versions of the higher end cameras. Moving on from there, we have the A7R IV, which is a great photo-centric camera. When you're looking at the A7 series and you notice there's things like the A7, which is just A7 IV, and then there's the A7R, and then there's things like the A7S series. Those are all A7 cameras, but they kind of have different specialties. And this has sort of evolved over the years, but in general, A7R, the R stands for resolution, so it tends to have a higher resolution sensor, and it tends to be geared more towards photo capabilities. The A7S, I think it stands for sensitivity is what the S is supposed to stand for. It has a lower resolution sensor, but it's more sensitive with larger pixels that kind of make it more ideal for video. So the A7S series cameras lean more towards video, and the A7 series are kind of the hybrid of both. And that's kind of the logic there. So the A7R series is more of a photocentric series. The A7R4 is definitely a better photo camera than it is a video camera, but it does have video capabilities. It is a number of years old at this point, so it's kind of like the A7C Mark II, kind of not as old as the A7 III, but it's getting older. If you're spending $3,000 on a camera, I don't know that I would really recommend the A7R4 currently, especially because literally they just released the A7R6, so 2 generations behind. We'll talk about that when we get to that part of the lineup. The A7 IV, I have the A7 V. That's this camera right here. And this camera is a good example of how Sony is sort of like starting to blur the lines between like the photo, the video, and the hybrid cameras, because this one is pretty close to a little bit of everything. You can do 30 frames per second electronic shutter for photos, which is a lot. That's really good for like any kind of sports and things. It's got a 33 megapixel sensor. It's fantastic for photos, but it's also great for video. It does have 4K 120 with a little bit of a crop and then 4K 60 uncropped. So it is a super strong camera that can really easily keep up with the higher end video cameras like the A7S III, the FX3, but it can also then keep up with the higher end photo cameras like the A7R series. So the A7 V, and it also has Sony's newer screen that not only flips out like you would expect, but then can also go over here like this and then flip like up. This is basically all the A7 III can do, is kind of like this, out a little bit like that. This camera can do that, but then it can also flip to the side. So you have like every bit of versatility. It's a really nice screen. And it also has a viewfinder. The hybrid cameras have screens and viewfinders, which is really nice. This camera is great. I need to do a full review on it. Now, the A7CR in a lot of ways is kind of like the photo version of the E1, where the E1 takes this great video sensor and smashes it into a compact body. The A7CR takes a really high resolution 60-something megapixel sensor and smashes it into a compact body that's like the A7C Mark II. So if you want a compact full frame camera that's got like as much photo capability as you can put in there, that's this camera. All of the cameras can do photo and video. It's just some of them lean more strongly towards one or the other. The next camera, very interesting camera, is the Sony FX2. The FX2 is an interesting camera that seems like it was kind of misunderstood when it was released, but then gained a lot of popularity since. It is about $1,000 cheaper than the FX3. It's a full frame camera, but what Sony tried to do with the FX2 is basically take their hybrid camera style, things like the A7 V, and move that into an FX series body. So it has a higher resolution sensor that's made more towards photos. So it's like in this FX body, but it's a better photo camera than the FX3 would be. The FX2 does not have the same high frame rate or low light capabilities as the FX3, but it's still absolutely excellent. And of course, you even get more modern autofocus because it's a newer camera. But one thing that it has that I am super jealous of as an FX3 owner is this right here. It not only has a viewfinder, but it's kind of like a camcorder style viewfinder that sticks out and then moves up and down. And having only been able to use a screen on the FX3, there have been a number of times over the past years where having a viewfinder, and especially something like that, a video-centric style viewfinder, would have been awesome. So that's kind of a very cool upgrade to the FX2 that as an FX3 owner, I am jealous of. The camera itself is $3,000. And then if you get it with that FX style XLR handle, that's hard to say, it's $3,400. So we're getting bumped up in price there. Now we're moving on to the A7R V, which is a photocentric camera, but this is really where, when this camera was released, it has a lot of, if not most of the video capabilities of like the FX3, A7S III, but it's also a really good photo camera. And that was kind of one of the first times where people were like, I don't know why you wouldn't necessarily want to use this for video. In the past, there have been a lot of clear reasons. Higher resolution sensors, like the ones that go on the R series, they do tend to have worse rolling shutter in video. So when you whip the camera back and forth, things kind of get a jello-y effect. That has gotten better in newer cameras, but it's just an effect of having a higher resolution sensor. It's just something that happens. That's one of the reasons the FX3, the A7S III, they only have 12 megapixel sensors, because that is kind of the ideal resolution for 4K video. You don't have any rolling shutter issues. You don't have any overheating issues. It's just kind of a 1-to-1 ratio with pixels to resolution for 4K video. But technology has made that a little bit less of an issue than it used to be in the past. And the A7R Mark V was kind of the first time that Sony had a photocentric camera that was almost as capable as a video camera as it is a photo camera. And that leads us to the A7S III, which was released in 2020, so 6 years ago. And it has gotten a number of firmware updates since. This was my first modern Sony camera. This is the one that brought me into the Sony ecosystem. I still use it on almost every video I make. This is primarily my B camera, sometimes my main camera still. And it is just absolutely fantastic. It doesn't have active cooling or fans or anything like the FX cameras do, but I've never had it overheat. It's not the best photo camera in the world because that's not really what it's made for, but you can take photos with it. Primarily, I use that for like thumbnails and stuff. I wouldn't take like important family photos or sports photos or something with it. But social media, thumbnails, it can do a good job with that. And then for video is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, it's a really, really incredible camera. And the fact that it is 6 years old and it's actually more expensive, I think it was $3,300, $3,400 when I bought mine in 2021. And now it's $4,000 because that is the world that we live in. So still an excellent camera, even though it's a number of years old. And the same goes for the FX3 right next to it. That has been my main camera since the end of 2020. The FX3, can't say enough good things about it, except that it is expensive now. I got my FX3 for, I think it was $3,800 at the time, and now it's $4,300, and it comes with the audio handle. You don't have the option to get it without it, so you're just getting the audio handle, which I think is fine because for sure it's just worth getting. The FX3, I mean, I have my full review on the FX3. Since its release, the FX3 has kind of become like the default Sony video camera. Like if you want, you know, like a mirrorless video camera, the FX3 is kind of the place that a lot of people go. A lot of production companies, independent productions, corporate things, it's Netflix approved. So, you know, even actual like film sets and stuff use the FX3, rely on the FX3. It is a really good camera, even though unfortunately it's more expensive now than it was when it was released. And then that takes us to the A7R Mark VI. So this is why I was like, I don't know if you really want to get the A7R IV up here because it's just 2 generations behind at this point. And the A7R VI, I don't have it, but if you watch any of the reviews and the new release stuff on it, it is a super high resolution photo-based camera that essentially has no video limitations for the most part. And it does have also a very expensive price because it is $4,500. So that's how you get those things, is you end up paying a lot more money for that. Otherwise, the A7R V is still a super capable camera, and it's on a bit of a sale now because it's the old model, even though it's still very, very capable. And then we move up from there to the Alpha 1. The intent with the Alpha 1 and even the A9 III, these cameras were kind of intended to be kind of what the A7R VI is. They're Sony's no compromise cameras. They are the ones that you want maximum photo, maximum video in one camera. That's the way to go. However, there is a very strange thing with the A1 in that it does not have a flip out screen. And when you're spending $5,700 on sale for a camera that can do a little bit of everything, the fact that it doesn't have a flip out screen kind of sucks. So that is a thing that I know a lot of people have gotten the A1 and ended up moving away from it just because they got really tired of that limitation on a camera for that price. But don't worry, if you want to give Sony a ton of money, you can spend $6,400 on sale on the A9 Mark III, and then you get the most baller hybrid camera Sony makes with a full-on flip-out screen. It's the same one as on the A7 V, where it's not just the flip-out screen, but it's the tilt screen. They've been putting this on a lot of their newer cameras, and it's a very versatile system that kind of gives you the best of all like screen worlds, and it's just a higher quality screen. This is honestly though, like I'm never gonna spend $6,300 on a camera, so this is way beyond me. And that's kind of where we end up in this more expensive part of Sony's lineup here. There is an A1 Mark II, so if you want to spend now $7,000 to get that flip out screen, and there's other features too, like the new AI stuff, which despite it being called AI stuff is actually really good in Sony cameras, autofocus tracking, all that kind of stuff. Basically, if you want to incorporate some kind of 8K workflow, the A9, the A1, that's the way to go there. Then there's the FX6, which is a really high-end version of the FX3. So a lot of times on productions, something like the FX6 will be the main camera. It's a huge full-on cinema camera, built-in ND filters, the whole shebang. And then people use the FX3 as a secondary camera on shoots. And then there's a camera that I've never even seen before, the FR7 PTZ robotic camera. If you want to spend $12,000 on a PTZ cinema camera, you probably already know that you need that. And you don't need me to explain it in this video. So I know that was a lot of information, and obviously, you can make entire videos on every one of these cameras, series of videos on every one of these cameras. So trying to smash them all into one video, things kind of get glossed over. But my hope here is that it kind of breaks down Sony's lineup a little bit in a way that helps you understand where the different models sit and what might work best for you, so that even if you don't know exactly which camera you want, it at least maybe helped you narrow it down to a few different cameras. And if you want to know more about my Sony cameras, I do have dedicated reviews on them, and they have been absolutely fantastic. It's hard to buy a bad camera these days, but I've been super happy with my Sonys for the past 5 years.